Hi, I'm Symon, CEO of Parallo. At Parallo, we work with lots of software companies like yours, looking after the cloud platform so they can get on with product and growing their business. This week I've been challenged by the team to come up with 7 tips in 7 days, all around cost saving. Today's tips are about infrastructure optimization. Some of these are perhaps a little hairy, so make sure you consult with your team before you take action on any of these. So tip number 1 is really about right sizing. Make sure that the objects that you're using in Azure are actually the right scale for what you need. It's pretty easy, to spin up a bunch of stuff, maybe a year ago and find that actually your customer usage patterns have changed or your technology's changed, and now you're paying too much for something where you could scale it down and use a smaller version of it. So it's really good to get a sort of independent, holistic view across everything, or even get one of your people to do that, just to make sure that you're not wasting any money. Tip number 2, removing objects rather than scaling down. Scaling down is the least obtrusive way to reduce cost on a sort of dynamic basis, like overnight and when load is low. But let's say that you need to maximize the reduction in cost, well then removing objects is probably the way to go. This might be dev test workloads that you can destroy and spin up again when you need them, or other objects like that. Azure makes that pretty straightforward. That's not difficult to automate the deployment of objects. So do think about that if you really need to cut your costs. Tip number 3, resource utilization. A little bit tied to tip number 1 around object types, but this is really how much of your existing footprint is being utilized and what are the utilization patterns. So really making sure that you have the right scale of capacity when you need it, that you also don't have objects that aren't being utilized whatsoever. Tip number 4, tuning down resource intensive processes. Okay, this is starting to get into that sort of ugly bracket, but let's say you just have to reduce cost. Well, take a look at the way that your app is constructed. For example, one of our customers has a process that fires once a minute, and it takes quite a lot of sort of database resource to run. So if they were to move that to say once every 10 minutes, then they've just reduced the load on that database for that process by 90%. So it's that sort of thing to look for. Hey, your business logic might mean that you can't do that, or you've got some compliance stuff that simply has to run that often. But if you sort of take that approach to looking at the way your app works, you can probably find that there's some ways to reduce some costs. Let's say that process that ran every minute, just run it every 2 minutes. Well, you just halve the load on the database server. So it's that sort of thinking to run over your platform and see where you have opportunities to save some money. Tip number 5, blue-green deployments. Blue-green deployments are a fabulous way to check for user adoption of features or other things, but let's admit it, when you're in cost-saving mode, they're a bit of a luxury. So again, another one of the slightly ugly tips, and yes, you lose some functionality and so on, but if you really need to cut costs, just turn one of those off for a while and just run on one. Tip number 6, and the ugliest one of all, and I wouldn't recommend this unless your back is really against the wall, but let's say you have a high availability or disaster recovery duplication of some of your infrastructure, you could consider getting rid of it. Be very careful with this. You want to check your customer agreements around SLAs and uptime and recovery timeframes and so on, but if push comes to shove, that is an opportunity to cut some more cost out. And those are today's tips on infrastructure optimization. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch these videos, so thank you very much.